Welcome everyone to another episode of the Virtual Ninja Show. Today it's all about Defender for Endpoint on macOS. And I have Michael with me today. He was already one of my experts on the previous episodes talking about incidents and alerts. And before I hand over to him to introduce himself, a quick note: we have October, I told you already, and it's the Cybersecurity Awareness Month. So watch out for content that helps you stay safe and secure. And now, Michael, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Heike. Glad to be back.
Yes, so I know your topic is usually incidents, hunting. How comes? What made you be my expert on this show for Defender for Endpoint on macOS?
So I wanted to talk about macOS today because macOS, just like Windows, is a client. There's users using it, and users like to go to links they're not supposed to, install software they're not supposed to. Essentially, they are an entry point into your enterprise, just like any other client. We've got some really great capabilities on Defender for Endpoint for macOS, and I want to cover some of the latest stuff and how it kind of fits into the whole XDR vision.
I love that. And, the beauty, I think, is about, of course, having visibility, as you said, like across your estate. Like, it's not just Windows machines that are like impacted or something. It's Linux, it's Mac, it's iOS and Android, like everything that connects to a corporate network or like an organization's data can be attacked and harm that organization, right?
So macOS brings a lot of the same capabilities you're used to finding on Windows and also Linux with the Defender stack. We've got a lot of the common features such as EDR, endpoint protection. We've got device control, tamper protection on there to make sure attackers don't turn off our security, network protection, web content filtering to ensure that you don't have users going to suspicious or malicious URLs or unapproved content for your service. And also, live response is a recently announced capability we've got, which enables you to get that remote shell in just like you're used to getting with Windows. So you can actually respond to threats as they appear.
And all this visibility, like the portal gives you visibility as well as the configuration options for network protection and live response and all of this in the same console. So there's nothing different where people can do the live response or add an IOC or these kind of things.
Exactly. It plays right into the whole XDR story, essentially. So your alerts go to the same place as your other Defender for Endpoint alerts, which is the Microsoft 365 Defender portal. They get correlated with incidents based on similarities, some URLs and such. And it also is available in advanced hunting, so you get custom detections as well. So you have the ability to write your own detections just like you can with the rest of our stack.
Wow. Okay. So I know we, over the last years, we developed a lot, we improved and enhanced a lot, and I think all these features were needed and wanted, and they're all there for our customers now. And before we actually maybe go in there, let's talk a little bit about the evolution of Mac, because I think this is important when we go to the topic of onboarding and configuring Defender for Endpoint on Mac. So you want to help me understand why is this important?
Sure. So Mac and Windows have a very different underlying architecture, but there's similarities you can kind of grasp onto. Probably the biggest difference you're going to run into is going to be the way that you configure it. In Windows, your primary mechanism for configuring a system is going to be via registry keys, which is essentially an OS-hosted Jetpack database. It's multi-user, multi-access. You can write ACLs all the way down to the registry key. It's different in macOS. So macOS uses what are calledplists, which are essentially binary XML typically, that's tied to the specific application you're configuring. This means it's a little bit different because you don't have this multi-user concept, so you're essentially writing a XML config file for the application and then pushing it down from something like an MDM. So whereas in the Windows side, you typically go set registry keys or ensure that files are on a box in a certain place. In a Mac, most of the time what you're doing is you're specifying a configuration, you're tying it to a specific application, and you're dropping it on the box. So it's a little bit different when you're managing a Mac from how you manage a Windows. Now, from an OS perspective, so Defender currently supports N-2, so whatever the current OS version of macOS is, plus 2 versions prior to it. Now, there's some really big changes that Apple made over the years in macOS. So if we go back to 1014, the way we integrate there is we use what's called a kernel extension. So it gives us access to all the files and such we need to do all the anti-malware scanning and identify what activity is going on for EDR purposes.
But this is not only, sorry to interrupt you, this is not just for us, that was for everyone who wrote an application for 10, 15, 14.
1014, yeah. So it's just the way that people would typically integrate with the OS. They added some new security features to 1015. So now essentially what you have to do is you have to grant permissions to the app to have full disk access to read the files and such as they're accessed. Now, this means there's a couple more configs in place if you're using 10.15 or later. So 10.15 is Catalina, essentially, or later. You have to essentially allow Defender to have access to the full disk. You have to allow the network protection sensor to have the ability to see what traffic is going on the networking stack. So it's some interesting, great privacy capabilities that came along with the OS. But it does mean there's a few additional configurations if you're using 10.15, 11, or 12. 11 being Big Sur and 12 being Monterey. Another big change on the Apple side is they came out with what's called M1 Silicon, which is essentially their own chip. It's got some really great security features to it. There is a very important note though. So if you're deploying Defender for Endpoint, one of the steps, if you have 10.14 in your environment, is to approve the kernel extension. If you push that down to an M1 Silicon machine, that configuration profile is going to fail. So keep that in mind. You may want to put your M1 configurations in a different configuration profile than the ones for the rest of your enterprise so you don't fail the configuration.
So you were saying it will fail, but it will not break anything. It will just not apply the settings.
Correct. Yeah, it's essentially the configuration is just going to not apply. It's going to throw an error to Jamf or Endpoint Manager or whatever you're using to configure your macOS devices.
Okay, good, but that's good. Like as long as nothing breaks and just fails, that's a good thing. So that means, like, if there is an organization that has a lower version and the newer version, they will have to have 2 configuration or profiles.
So the number of individual configuration profiles is probably going to depend primarily on the deployment mechanism. So endpoint managers, you have to essentially create a separate configuration profile for each individual setting that you want to apply to your Mac. So the full disk access needs to be a configuration profile. The network filter access is a configuration profile. The approval of the system or the kernel extension, depending if it's 10.15 or later or 10.14, is going to be individual configuration profiles. In Jamf, however, you do have the ability to kind of group a bunch of these together. So, like, for example, you can put the onboarding package together with the system extension approvals and all the full disk access in a single configuration profile. The important thing here, though, is if you put the approval for the kernel extension in the same profile as the one that's going out to your M1 Max, when it applies, it's going to fail the profile, which means all the settings associated with it are not going to apply either. So it's kind of an important consideration when you're considering how to deploy to your Macs, especially if there's M1s in the mix.
So I would assume, knowing our content writers, technical content writers, that we have a documentation for that you will hopefully point us to later.
Absolutely, yeah. There's thorough documentation, especially for Endpoint Manager and for Jamf, how to walk through a deployment from start to finish in Defender.
So then, Michael, how do we get started with bringing our macOS devices into Defender for Endpoint or our Microsoft 365 Defender portal?
So onboarding a Mac is going to be in the same place as the other supported operating systems. So if you go over here on the left, scroll down, you're going to see Settings, and then under Endpoints, you'll see we've got our onboarding option right here. And in this drop down, instead of Windows 10 and 11, we're going to choose Mac OS. Now, there's 2 different ways you can go. You can do a local script, which is essentially if you just want to run a shell script on a specific Mac, or if you want to use what I expect most organizations are going to be using, which is a MDM, such as Intune/Endpoint Manager. A slightly different package comes with each of these. So there's 2 pieces here now. So you have the installation package, which is sort of like the software itself, And then you've got the onboarding package. So this is going to be the configurations that need to be put into your MDM to tell it to point to your Defender tenant. So installation package, first piece, push that out using whatever mechanism you guys y'all are currently using. And then for onboarding, when you download it, you're going to see that we've got options in there for Jamf as well as the configurations for Mem. These are essentially going to be like plist files, if you will, that you can import into your MDM to point it to your tenant.
Okay, so before we actually go into how this works and look at our documentation, I know offboarding is also always a topic. This is the same security mechanism behind it, so you would need to do an offboarding script for Mac as well, or is this a different concept for Mac?
Correct. Yeah. So if you wanted to offboard, you go down to the offboarding tab, and you'll see there's an option here for Mac OS, and we've got just the same thing, a local script or an MDM package that you can push to offboard a device from Defender.
Perfect. Thank you. Just to make sure that is the same mechanism. Good. So I know that the configuration, when we talked about this episode here, is a little bit repetitive, and we are not going to really annoy the audience here. But can you explain a little bit in a few steps, maybe with that nice diagram that you've prepared, how that configuration works?
So let's talk about the flow, essentially, that's associated with onboarding a Mac to Defender. So from the start here, you're going to want to pull down that MD onboarding package we talked about in the portal, and you're going to want to create a new EDR configuration profile. So this is essentially the onboarding information for it. Now there's an important decision here if you're deploying to Mac OS 10.15 and later, or if it's 10.14. If it's 10.14, you're going to have to create a configuration profile that deploys the kernel extension. This essentially tells the Mac device to trust our kernel extension when Defender's installed. And this, by the way, saves a whole bunch of prompts on the user's side. If you don't push this configuration out, the user is going to be prompted to approve these locally on their device. Now, if you're using 10.15 or later, so you create a configuration profile to approve the system extension. So this is the 10.15 or later way. It's essentially the replacement of the kernel extension that we use in 10.14. Then you create a configuration profile that allows full disk access, allow notifications, and then in all cases, you create a configuration profile that enables the network filter. This is what we use for network protection and web content filtering. Once all these configurations are in place, I would recommend pushing it out, letting it bake to make sure all the configs hit before you actually push the application. Otherwise, some of your users may experience some prompts because if the application happens to be installing before the configurations are in place, they're not going to have these pre-approved things that you pushed out from your MDM. So the last step here is essentially to push out the Defender application itself. This is the package that you downloaded from Defender for Endpoint portal. If you're using Endpoint Manager, it's actually automatic. It's actually built right into Endpoint Manager.
Okay, so I have one question. I think the third icon there, or you were saying an EDR policy. Like we also have AV, right? It's not just EDR. Why is it called an EDR policy? That just confused me a little bit.
So that's a great point. This is up to now. This is basically just configuring the software itself to get it onboarded to the tenant. We haven't actually configured endpoint protection yet. Now, the way we configure endpoint protection is going to vary depending on if you're using Jamf or if you're using Endpoint Manager. The good news here on Endpoint Manager is it's actually integrated. So if you go under Endpoint Security, and when it comes up, click on Antivirus, and then we're going to create a new policy for Mac OS. And we're going to choose antivirus. This will give you the ability to, let's go ahead and give it a name, Mac OS AV policy. So from here, you have the ability to configure everything about your Mac AV, just the same way as you would configure a Windows AV from up here. So exclusions, turning on and off real-time protection, passive mode, etc. This is actually a very important point as well. So passive mode, unlike Windows, so in Windows 10 and 11, will automatically detect if there's another AV on the box. If this is on Mac OS, you have the option to explicitly configure it in passive mode if you choose, but it's not automatically detecting AVs by default.
Which means they would fight for who wins first.
Correct. It would be a Highlander situation.
Okay. Yeah, we don't want this. Okay,
We
only
don't want
one
we
AV on one box, whatever the box is, what the operating system is. We don't want to have fights.
exactly. Now, on Jamf, it's a little bit different. So with Jamf, you have to download a schema, a JSON schema, and apply it as a custom application configuration. The good news is with that JSON schema in place, you get these nice clickable buttons where you can just basically go through and choose your options, very similar to how you can in Endpoint Manager today.
And this file, the people can get it on our docs, or where do they get that file from?
Correct. So yeah, everything for configuring Mac OS is going to be available in our docs if you're using Jamf or if you're using Endpoint Manager. So for Jamf, let's talk a little bit about the AV config. So we've got a link here for the GitHub repository. If you click on this, you're going to be pointed to a schema JSON file. So the cool thing is if you use this schema JSON file, it gives you these great clickable buttons, if you will. So we'll go ahead and put this in raw mode. I'm just going to go ahead and copy this real quick. Now in Jamf, what you're going to do is you're going to go under Application and Custom Settings, External Applications, and you're going to choose a preference domain. This is going to be com.microsoft.wdab for Windows Defender Antivirus. And then Custom Schema, we're going to add it in, and you can paste it. You can also upload it if you choose, if you want to choose it, download as a file and upload it. The second you do that, you get these nice clickable buttons. So it's nice and easy to choose, like you want to set up real-time protection or allowed threats or exclusion merge policies, and click on allow there. Oops, apologize. Pick a couple of these here, threat type settings. Once you do that, you're going to have for example, real-time protection is defaulted to turned on. If you want to toggle passive mode, this would be the button for that. And you can also create threat type settings per threat type. What happens in the background is Jamf is going to build the plist policy for you and apply it down to the endpoint when it does its next policy refresh.
Okay, so I think we talked now about first of all downloading, pushing down the application as well as the different configuration files. There is a different one for the EDR settings. There's a different one for the AV settings. All of this is in documentation. There is a link. And so now, after all of this works, all the alerts, information, hopefully not too many crazy alerts, just information will flow in your tenant. You can use the data for, as you mentioned, Michael, advanced hunting, and all the different features that are available for macOS as well. What about updates? So I know that we often release a new version of our engine. So do I need to go through the whole thing again?
So macOS is updated with using the Microsoft Update application. That's the same one that if you're familiar with using the Office products, it's essentially the same underlying application. So these will be pushed via the Microsoft Update application down to the endpoint as they're updated.
Okay, cool. Is there anything else that we missed explaining to our audience how they get Defender for Endpoint on the macOS device, what they need to be looking out for, be careful about, anything?
That should cover it. We've got, I think we've covered pretty much everything around the setup and deployment. There's a lot of stuff once you get the data in there. You might want to create some custom detections or just do some hunting around your environment to see what kind of activities out there. A lot of times customers will not have a EDR on their Mac OS device before they put Defender on. So it's a great opportunity to see what's out there, figure out what software is out there, where users are going from a URL perspective, identify any threats that maybe you hadn't identified before.
So I think we talked about what is it, what are the majority or like the key features that we wanted to highlight that are available, how to get the visibility in the portal. To do this, you need to onboard them, you need to configure them, different tools you can use. The documentation has all of this for you, as well as then we mentioned the offboarding in case it was a test device or something, you want to offboard it again. Same, there's a script to do so. So yeah, and Michael, thank you again for having been my expert on this show again. And I'm pretty sure I'm going to invite you for another episode whilst we continue with the Virtual Ninja Show again.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Heike, and happy hunting for everybody out there.
Thank you. And with that, thanks everyone for watching. Don't forget to go on aka.ms/ninja show. Watch out for the upcoming episodes. Give us your voice, your feedback. There's a little form for you so we know how you like it, as well as if you have questions or some suggestions for future sessions, please put them all in there. And enjoy Cyber Month, Awareness Month. See you soon.